the last account that I want to discuss, is ethical objectivism. So the last account that I want to discuss is ethical objectivism. Obviously, this is different from ethical naturalism, and we'll see about the distinctions between the two. All right. The ethical objectivist believes that ethical claims, right, what I ought to do, what I should do, isn't something that's subjective. It's not the case that it's my personal sort of relativistic interpretation of what action is. The ethical objectivist views that ethical statements, ethical claims are objectively true. They point to things in the world, right? They're not supernatural at all. They talk to things in the world, and these claims are objectively verifiable, objectively true. So the ethical objectivism is the view that claims of ethics are or ethical claims are objectively true. Okay, and we spoke about that distinction. How is ethical naturalism and ethical objectivism true? Well, we'll see with respect to benefits. I don't want to jump the gun yet, but I'll go back after I give an account of a very brief account of ethical objectivism to show why it has advantages over ethical naturalism, where it is weaker than ethical naturalism. First, the problem that we have with ethical objectivism, well, it's seemingly obvious, right? And there's an actual technical term for it, right? It's called cultural relativism. I'll get into discussions of cultural relativism maybe in the next video. I'll talk about cultural relativism. What is it? What's the theory? How do we come to understand it? But the problem is that societies disagree on proper moral conduct, right? No two societies are going to agree on every account of what proper moral action is, right? To say that something is objective is not to say that it is objective with respect to my society. When we say that something is objective, we're saying that this thing is universally objective for all societies. The argument, however, is that some societies govern themselves differently than we do, right? In our society, it's appropriate for women to wear short shorts. In other societies, it's inappropriate for women to wear short shorts. Is the argument that wearing short shorts is right in our society and therefore they're wrong? Or is the argument that wearing short shorts is not right and therefore we're wrong? I mean, what's the argument? So cultural relativism becomes a problem for ethical objectivism. Cultural relativism becomes a huge problem actually, for ethical objectivism. Now there's responses to this and there's retorts, there's a whole history of back and forth. I'm not going to get into any of that, right? There's only so much time that I have on these YouTube videos. What is considered good and bad in one society, what is approved in one society, might be disapproved in another. So how is it that the ethical objectivist makes claim to that, right? And with the ethical, in fairness, just to give one response, in fairness to the ethical objectivist argument, the ethical objectivist would say, listen, arguments for whether or not it's appropriate for women to wear short shorts isn't something that we're necessarily concerned with, right? We understand that various societies might make different determinations on the proper mode of conduct for those actions. But the ethical objectivist might say the following, right? This is a horrible example, forgive me for using it, right? But, philosophers. All right, so imagine that I were to have an infant newborn baby, and I were to tie a rope around that baby's leg, and I was supposed to suspend that baby from the ceiling so that the baby was hanging from its leg. And then I take a baseball bat and I crack the baby across its head, right? No matter what culture you're in, that's a horrible, horrific action, argues the ethical objectivist, right? When we see that action, we're like, thumbs down, right? That's a bad thing. That's not something that's good. Everyone can immediately recognize sort of what the symbol of a child, an infant is, right? new chance, new opportunity, pureness, so on and so forth. In cracking that child over the head, there's just a universal aversion to that action, and those are the type of actions that we're interested in discussing. And all we really need from sort of a philosophical standpoint is just one act. That act is universally recognized as being deplorable. Therefore, there must be some ethical objectivist stances that actually have validity. That's sort of the construction of the argument. So what are the benefits then, right? What are the benefits? Well, obviously, one of the huge benefits, if not the greatest benefit, is that ethical actions are empirically verifiable, right? You can verify, in experience, proper ethical action, right? What you do is you make an appeal to the law, and then you determine, based on what that action is, whether or not it conforms to the ethical objectivist stance. So the distinction between ethical objectivism and ethical naturalism, the ethical naturalist believes that it's our actions, what we ought to do, our ethics, is a product of sort of this gradual evolutionary account, right? We have to look back at the totality of our evolutionary account, and we recognize that loving family members and safeguarding our lives facilitates the process of evolutionary adaptation. Killing members is counteractive to sort of this evolutionary adaptation. Therefore, we shouldn't kill, right? That would be the argument. The ethical objectivist doesn't really use this grand historical narrative in order to make determinations of morality. The ethical objectivist looks specifically at particular instances of very, very good actions, heroism, very, very bad actions, genocide and the like, and make accounts of morality based on something that's accessible, immediately verifiable in today's world, right, without this historical narrative. So the distinction between, the first sort of rough general distinction between the ethical naturalist and the ethical objectivist is whether or not the ethical theory makes an appeal to sort of this historical scientific narrative. Okay, that was like a roller coaster ride. Hopefully that made sense. I offered two theological approaches. The first being the divine command theory, which states that an action is right because God commanded it. He gave his seal of approval, and therefore it's right. That is the truest belief of what fundamentalist religious belief is that you believe that it's right because God commanded it. The response to that in a theological setting is that no, God commands it because it's right. Its being right is independent to God commanding it, and God recognizes that this action is right in itself. You have the you have the ability to rationally access the truth of that, and therefore God commands it, right? He commands it after the fact. The next response, the next two accounts are two secular accounts, and they deny both of those accounts because they don't agree with the existence of God or supernatural beings. The first account was ethical naturalism, which, as I just said, is a historical sort of evolutionary account of the separation between is and ought. The appeal is made to evolution. And the last account was ethical objectivism, which says, well, we're going to make scientific verifiable appeals as well. However, we're not going to make appeals to evolution. Our appeals are going to be made to verifiable experiences in reality. I gave you a very horrific example. Since we only need one example, there is some validity to our claims. And I'll leave it up to you to decide which of the four you like best for yourself. Obviously, there's a myriad more examples of ethical accounts. I just wanted to give you a very rough, very general account of what ethics is, some of the religious approaches, some of the secular approaches, and leave it to you to make determinations on your own. With that being said, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Have a good day. Goodbye.